The sun blazed mercilessly over the vast desert range as Jake Sullivan rode his weathered horse through the scrub brush and scattered rocks. Dust clung to his clothes and face, making him look like he'd been carved from the very earth he traveled. Jake was a drifter, a man who called no place home and followed whatever work the wind brought his way. His horse, a sturdy mare named Stella, picked her way carefully between the thorny bushes that dotted the landscape. The desert was unforgiving, and Jake had learned long ago that only fools rushed through such terrain. Water was scarce, shade was precious, and trouble had a way of finding those who weren't careful. As the afternoon heat reached its peak, Jake spotted something unusual in the distance. Near a cluster of large boulders, he could see a figure waving frantically. Even from far away, Jake could tell the person was in distress. His instincts, honed by years of wandering through dangerous territory, told him to approach with caution. As he drew closer, Jake could see it was a young woman, probably in her 20s, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight. She was standing near what appeared to be a small camp, but something was clearly wrong. Her clothes were disheveled, and she kept looking around nervously, as if expecting trouble to appear at any moment. "Please, stranger," she called out when Jake was within earshot. "I desperately need your help." Jake guided Stella to a stop a safe distance away and touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Jake Sullivan, miss. What seems to be the trouble?" The woman's eyes were wide with worry and embarrassment. "I'm Martha Clayton. I was traveling with my family's wagon train, but we stopped here yesterday to rest and repair a broken wheel. This morning when I woke up, all my clothes and belongings were gone." Jake looked around the camp more carefully. He could see the remains of a small fire, some scattered blankets, and tracks in the sand that suggested several people had been there recently. What struck him as odd was that Martha appeared to be wearing a man's oversized shirt and pants that clearly didn't belong to her. "Stolen, you say?" Jake asked, dismounting from Stella and tying her reins to a stunted tree. "Tell me exactly what happened." Martha wrung her hands nervously. "We made camp here 2 days ago when our wagon wheel cracked. My father and brothers went into the nearest town, Copper Creek, to get supplies and find someone to fix it. They said they'd be back by morning, but they haven't returned yet." She paused, looking embarrassed. "I was alone here last night, and I thought I heard noises around midnight. But I was so tired I convinced myself it was just desert animals. When I woke up this morning, my trunk was gone. Everything I owned was in there. My dresses, my shoes, my mother's jewelry, even my father's spare clothes that I was keeping for him." Jake studied the ground around the campsite. The sand told a story for those who knew how to read it. There were boot prints from at least 3 different men, and drag marks that suggested something heavy had been pulled away from the camp. "These clothes you're wearing now?" Jake asked. Martha's cheeks reddened. "I found them hanging on a bush over there. Someone left them. I think as some kind of cruel joke. They're far too big, but they were the only thing I had to wear." Jake walked over to examine the bush she pointed to. The clothes had been placed deliberately, not dropped or discarded carelessly. This wasn't a random theft. Someone had planned this carefully. "Miss Clayton," Jake said, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Did anyone know you were traveling this route? Did anyone in the last town you visited pay special attention to your family's wagon?" Martha thought for a moment. "Well, we stopped in Dry Gulch 3 days ago. Father needed to buy supplies and ask about the road ahead. There were some men in the saloon who seemed very interested in our conversation. They kept asking about where we were headed and how long we planned to travel." "Can you describe these men?" One was tall and thin with a black mustache. He wore a fancy vest with silver buttons. Another was shorter and stocky, with red hair and freckles. The third one was quiet, but he had a scar running down the left side of his face from his eye to his chin. Jake nodded grimly. These descriptions might prove useful, but first he needed to understand more about what had happened here. "Miss Clayton, I need to ask you something that might sound strange. Are you certain nothing else was taken? No money? No weapons? No food supplies?" Martha shook her head. "That's what's so puzzling. They left the food, the cooking supplies, even the tools my father uses for wagon repairs. They only took my personal belongings. This detail made Jake's suspicions grow stronger. Professional thieves would have taken everything of value. This felt personal, like someone was trying to send a message or cause specific embarrassment and hardship. Where exactly did your father and brothers go in Copper Creek? Jake asked. To Henderson's General Store and the wheelwright shop. They were also going to check at the sheriff's office for any warnings about road conditions ahead. Jake looked toward the horizon in the direction of Copper Creek. The town was at least a half-day's ride away. If Martha's family had encountered trouble there, it might explain their delay in returning. Miss Clayton, Jake said seriously, I think someone planned this theft very carefully. The question is whether they were after your belongings specifically, or if this is connected to your family's business in Copper Creek. Martha's face grew pale. What do you mean? I mean, this doesn't feel like a random crime. Someone knew you'd be alone here, knew what you had with you, and took only what would cause you the most distress and embarrassment. That suggests they either know your family personally or have been watching you for some time. As Jake spoke, he noticed something glinting in the sand near the campfire. He knelt down and brushed away the dirt, revealing a small silver button. It was ornate and expensive looking, not the kind of thing that would be on ordinary work clothes. Miss Clayton, have you ever seen this button before? Martha took the button and examined it carefully. Her eyes widened in recognition. Yes. This is from the vest worn by that tall man in Dry Gulch, the one with the black mustache. I remember because the buttons were so shiny they caught the light every time he moved. Jake stood up, his mind working through the implications. It seems our thieves left a calling card, whether they meant to or not. The question now is whether they're long gone or if they're still in the area. He walked to a higher piece of ground and scanned the surrounding desert. In the distance, he could see dust clouds that might indicate riders, but they were too far away to be certain. Miss Clayton, I'm going to help you get your belongings back. But first we need to make sure you're safe. These men might return, especially if they realize they left evidence behind. Martha looked relieved but still worried. What should we do? I can't travel to town dressed like this, and I can't stay here alone. Jake considered their options. The smart thing would be to head to Copper Creek and alert the sheriff. But that would take time and might allow the thieves to escape with their stolen goods. On the other hand, staying here made Martha vulnerable if the men returned. Tell me more about your family's business, Jake said. What exactly brought you through this territory? Martha hesitated for a moment. My father is a merchant. He buys goods in the Eastern Territories and sells them in the mining towns out west. We were carrying a wagon load of fine fabrics, tools, and household goods to sell in Silver Ridge. This information made the picture clearer for Jake. If Martha's father was a traveling merchant, he might be carrying substantial money or valuable goods that would attract the attention of thieves. The theft of Martha's belongings might be just the beginning of a larger scheme. Miss Clayton, Jake said, I believe your family might be in danger. These men might have followed you from Dry Gulch, and if they were bold enough to rob you here, they might have plans for your father and brothers as well. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Oh no, do you really think so? It's possible. We need to act quickly. I'm going to track these thieves and see if I can find where they've taken your belongings. But first, I want you to come with me part way toward Copper Creek. We'll find a safe place for you to wait while I investigate. As they prepared to leave the campsite, Jake noticed one more detail that troubled him. The wagon tracks from Martha's family showed that their wagon had left heading toward Copper Creek. But there were other wagon tracks leading in a different direction entirely. Someone else had been at this camp recently, and they hadn't gone to town. Jake kept this observation to himself for now, not wanting to alarm Martha further. But his instincts told him that this desert range mystery was about to become much more complicated and dangerous than a simple theft. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Time was running short, and Jake knew that every minute of delay gave the thieves more opportunity to escape or cause further harm. Whatever had started here at this remote campsite was far from over. Jake helped Martha climb onto Stella behind him, and they set off across the desert terrain following the mysterious wagon tracks that led away from the main road to Copper Creek. The tracks were still fresh enough to follow, and Jake's experienced eye could read the story they told in the sand and rock. The wagon that made these tracks was heavily loaded, Jake explained as they rode. See how deep the wheel ruts are? And the spacing of the horse hoof prints suggests they were pulling a significant weight. Martha held tightly to Jake's belt as Stella carefully picked her way between the desert obstacles. Do you think it could be my father's wagon? I don't think so, Jake replied grimly. These tracks were made by a different type of wheel, and the spacing is wrong for your family's wagon. But whoever made these tracks was definitely at your campsite recently. They followed the trail for nearly an hour before it led them into a narrow canyon between two rocky ridges. The walls rose high on both sides, creating natural shade but also limiting their options for escape if they encountered trouble. Jake slowed Stella to a careful walk and kept his hand near his revolver. Stay alert, he whispered to Martha. This would be a perfect place for an ambush. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Jake noticed that the wagon tracks were joined by several sets of horse hoof prints. At least 4 riders had met the wagon here, suggesting this was a planned rendezvous point rather than a chance encounter. Suddenly, Jake heard voices echoing off the canyon walls ahead of them. He quickly guided Stella behind a large boulder and motioned for Martha to remain silent. They dismounted and crept forward on foot to get a better look. Around a bend in the canyon, they discovered a hidden camp. 3 men sat around a small fire, and Jake immediately recognized them from Martha's descriptions. The tall man with the black mustache was examining a beautiful blue dress, while the stocky red-haired man was rifling through a wooden trunk. The third man, the one with the scar, stood guard with a rifle in his hands. But what shocked Jake most was what else he saw in the camp. Tied to a tree near the back of the area were 3 men who appeared to be unconscious or injured. Even from a distance, Jake could tell by their clothes and build that these were likely Martha's father and brothers. Martha gasped quietly when she saw them, and Jake quickly placed a hand over her mouth to prevent her from crying out. They needed to be smart about this situation, not emotional. Your family is alive, Jake whispered. But we need a plan to get them out safely. Looking around the camp more carefully, Jake counted the men's horses and weapons. There were 6 horses total, meaning 3 additional men were somewhere else, probably standing watch or conducting other business. The odds were not in their favor for a direct confrontation. Listen carefully, Jake said to Martha. I'm going to create a distraction to draw some of these men away from the camp. When I do, I want you to circle around to where your family is tied up and see if you can free them. Can you do that? Martha nodded bravely, though Jake could see the fear in her eyes. As they watched, the man with the mustache pulled out a pocket watch and checked the time. Boss should be back soon with word from town, he said to the others. Hope he found out where old Clayton hid the real goods. This comment made Jake's blood run cold. These weren't just random thieves. They knew specific information about Martha's father, and were looking for something particular. The theft of Martha's belongings had been a message or a way to force cooperation, not the main objective. What did your father tell you about what he was carrying in the wagon? Jake whispered urgently to Martha. Just general merchandise for the mining towns, she replied, though he did seem nervous about something during the last few days of travel. He kept checking a small locked box he kept hidden under the wagon seat. Jake nodded grimly. Whatever was in that box was what these men really wanted. Martha's belongings had been taken to put pressure on her family to reveal the location of the real treasure. Before Jake could put his plan into action, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. 3 more riders were returning to the camp, and Jake could hear them talking excitedly as they approached. We found him, called out the lead rider as he dismounted. Jake could see this was a well-dressed man wearing expensive boots and a fine leather vest. This was clearly the leader of the group. Clayton talked after we told him what we'd do to his daughter. The gold is hidden in a false bottom of his wagon, just like we suspected. Gold! Now Jake understood what was really happening. Martha's father wasn't just a traveling merchant. He was carrying gold, probably from mining operations or a bank transfer. These men had planned an elaborate scheme to steal it. "Where's the wagon now?" asked the mustached man. "Still in Copper Creek, at Henderson's store. But Clayton's partners don't know about our little arrangement yet. We need to move fast before someone gets suspicious about why the old man hasn't come back to collect his wagon." The leader walked over to where Martha's father and brothers were tied up. "Wake them up," he ordered. "Time to go collect our payment." One of the men threw a bucket of water on the prisoners, and Jake could see Martha's father slowly regain consciousness. The man looked battered, but alert, and his eyes showed the kind of determination that Jake recognized in people who weren't ready to give up fighting. "Now, Mr. Clayton," the leader said in a mocking tone, "you're going to ride back to town with us and help us collect that gold from your wagon. And if you try anything foolish, remember that we know exactly where your daughter is supposed to be waiting for you." Martha started to move forward, but Jake caught her arm. "Not yet," he whispered. "If we act too soon, we'll just get everyone killed." As the gang prepared to leave with their prisoners, Jake realized this might be his best chance to act. With most of the men focused on getting ready to ride to town, their attention was divided. But he needed to even the odds somehow. Looking around the canyon, Jake spotted something that might help. High up on the canyon wall, there were loose rocks that looked like they could be dislodged with the right impact. If he could cause a rock slide, it might create enough confusion to allow him to rescue Martha's family. "Listen carefully," Jake told Martha. "I'm going to cause some chaos in a moment. When I do, you need to get to your family as fast as possible and start cutting their ropes. Don't worry about me. Just focus on freeing them." Jake climbed carefully up the canyon wall, using handholds in the rock face to position himself above the loose stones. He pulled out his revolver and took careful aim. One well-placed shot should destabilize the rocks and send them tumbling down toward the camp. Just as the gang was mounting their horses to leave, Jake fired his shot. The bullet struck the rock face exactly where he'd aimed, and immediately a cascade of stones began falling toward the camp below. The horses reared and panicked, and the men shouted in confusion as they tried to control their mounts and figure out what was happening. In the chaos, Martha ran toward her family while Jake scrambled down from his perch. But things didn't go exactly as planned. The leader of the gang was quicker to react than Jake had expected, and instead of panicking, he immediately began shouting orders to his men. "Someone's up there," the leader yelled, pointing toward Jake's position. "Spread out and find them. And grab the girl, she's here somewhere." Jake realized with growing alarm that he had underestimated these men. They were more organized and experienced than typical desert bandits. As he reached the bottom of the canyon wall, he found himself facing the scarred man with the rifle pointed directly at him. "Drop your weapon, stranger," the man said coldly. "You've caused enough trouble." At the same time, Jake could see that 2 other gang members had spotted Martha and were moving to surround her before she could reach her family. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and Jake knew he had only moments to turn things around before the rescue attempt became a disaster. The leader of the gang walked over to Jake, his hand resting on his gun handle. "You picked the wrong day to play hero, friend. Now you and the girl are going to join our little party, and we'll sort out this mess in town where we have more privacy." Jake's mind raced through his options. He was outnumbered and outgunned. But he noticed something the gang leader had missed. During the rock slide, one of the larger stones had landed near the tree where Martha's family was tied up, and Martha's father had managed to use the sharp edge of the rock to cut through most of his ropes. If Jake could keep the gang's attention focused on him for just a few more moments, Martha's father might be able to free himself and change the odds of this confrontation, but it would require perfect timing and a considerable amount of luck. "Before you do anything hasty," Jake said loudly, "you might want to consider that the sheriff in Copper Creek is probably already looking for the Clayton family. When they don't return as expected, people will come searching." The leader laughed. "The sheriff in Copper Creek is a friend of ours. He won't be looking for anyone until we tell him to." This revelation made Jake realize the corruption in this scheme ran deeper than he'd thought, and their situation was more dangerous than he'd imagined. The gang leader's revelation about the corrupt sheriff sent a chill through Jake, but he forced himself to remain calm. Years of drifting through lawless territories had taught him that situations could change quickly, and the key to survival was staying alert for opportunities. As the gang members moved to tie up Jake and Martha alongside her family, Jake noticed that Martha's father had indeed managed to cut most of his ropes. The older man's eyes met Jake's briefly, and Jake saw a subtle nod that told him Mr. Clayton was ready to act when the moment was right. "You know," Jake said conversationally to the gang leader, "there's something I don't understand about your plan." The leader paused in giving orders to his men. "What's that, stranger? If you've got the sheriff in your pocket and you know where the gold is hidden, why go through all this trouble with the family? Why not just take the gold and disappear?" The mustached man snorted. "Because Clayton here is smarter than he looks. The gold isn't just sitting in his wagon where anyone can find it. It's in a specially made hiding place that requires a specific combination to open. Without that combination, the gold might as well be at the bottom of the ocean." This explanation made sense to Jake, but it also revealed something important. The gang needed Mr. Clayton alive and cooperative, which meant they couldn't afford to harm his family too severely. This gave Jake a potential advantage if he could figure out how to use it. As one of the gang members approached with rope to tie Jake's hands, Martha's father suddenly sprang into action. The older man had been gradually loosening his bonds during the conversation, and now he launched himself at the nearest outlaw, catching the man completely off guard. "Now," Mr. Clayton shouted as he wrestled for the outlaw's gun. Jake immediately threw himself sideways into the scarred man who had been guarding him, knocking the rifle from his hands. At the same time, Martha scrambled toward her brothers, who were already straining against their loosened ropes. The camp erupted into chaos as the gang members tried to regain control of the situation. But Mr. Clayton's surprise attack had shifted the momentum, and Jake pressed the advantage by diving for the fallen rifle. The gang leader drew his pistol and aimed at Mr. Clayton, but Jake was faster. From his position on the ground, Jake fired the rifle and struck the leader's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning away into the rocks. "Everyone freeze!" Jake shouted, now having the advantage of the only functional weapon in immediate reach. But the gang wasn't finished yet. The red-haired man had circled around behind Jake during the confusion, and now he lunged forward with a knife drawn. Martha screamed a warning just in time for Jake to roll aside, but the knife blade caught his shoulder, sending a line of fire through his arm. Jake gritted his teeth against the pain and swung the rifle butt around, connecting solidly with the red-haired man's jaw. The outlaw dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the ground. By now, Martha's brothers had freed themselves and joined the fight. Though young, they were strong from years of frontier life, and they quickly overpowered the remaining gang members. Within moments, the situation had completely reversed, with the outlaws now finding themselves at the mercy of their intended victims. "Well done, stranger," Mr. Clayton said, breathing heavily as he picked up the gang leader's fallen pistol. "I don't know who you are, but my family owes you a considerable debt." "Jake Sullivan," Jake replied, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "And we're not out of trouble yet. These men mentioned they have allies in town, including the sheriff." Mr. Clayton's face darkened. "That explains a few things. When we arrived in Copper Creek, Sheriff Barnes seemed very interested in our wagon and asked a lot of questions about our travel plans. I thought he was just being thorough." The gang leader, clutching his wounded hand, sneered at them. "You think you've won something here? Barnes has got half the town on his payroll. You'll never make it out of Copper Creek alive, and that gold will be ours before the week is out." Jake looked thoughtfully at the captured outlaws. "Maybe not. Tell me, how exactly were you planning to open that hidden compartment in the wagon?" Mr. Clayton hesitated before answering. "It requires a specific sequence of movements on what appears to be decorative metalwork on the wagon side. Without knowing the exact pattern, the compartment looks like solid wood. And you never told anyone this combination?" "Never. It was a secret between me and the craftsman who built the hiding place." Jake smiled grimly. "Then these men have a problem. They need you alive and cooperative, but they've shown they can't be trusted to keep their word about your family's safety." "What are you suggesting?" Martha asked. "I'm suggesting we turn the tables completely. Instead of running from these men and their corrupt friends, we're going to set a trap for them." Jake outlined his plan as they tied up the gang members securely. The key was to use the outlaws' own greed and desperation against them. They would return to Copper Creek, but not as victims. Instead, they would appear to be cooperating while actually setting up the corrupt sheriff and his allies for capture. "It's risky," Mr. Clayton admitted after hearing the full plan. "But I like it better than running and constantly looking over our shoulders." They spent the next hour carefully preparing. Jake sent Martha to retrieve the stolen belongings from the gang's supplies, and she was relieved to find her trunk intact with all her possessions undamaged. The outlaws had apparently planned to use her belongings as leverage but hadn't actually wanted the items themselves. As Martha changed back into her own clothes behind a large rock, Jake and Mr. Clayton questioned the captured gang members more thoroughly. Under pressure, they learned that Sheriff Barnes had been taking bribes from various criminal groups for over 2 years. The scheme to steal Mr. Clayton's gold was just the latest in a series of organized thefts targeting travelers carrying valuables. "There's a whole network of them," the mustached outlaw admitted reluctantly. "They get word from contacts in the Eastern Territories about who's carrying what. Then they set up ambushes along the travel routes." "How many people are involved in Copper Creek?" Jake pressed. "Barnes, his deputy, the owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon, and a couple of local businessmen who help identify targets." This information gave Jake confidence that his plan could work. The corruption was extensive, but not universal, which meant there were still honest people in town who could be turned into allies if approached correctly. As the afternoon wore on, they prepared to put Jake's plan into motion. They would leave the gang members tied up in the canyon with minimal food and water. Enough to survive, but not enough to be comfortable. If the plan worked, law enforcement would return to collect them within a few days. If it failed, someone would eventually find them. "Remember," Jake told Martha and her family as they prepared to ride toward Copper Creek, "the most important thing is to act natural when we get to town. As far as anyone knows, you were delayed by wagon repairs, and I'm just a drifter you hired to help with security." Mr. Clayton checked his pocket watch. "If we ride steady, we should reach town just after dark. That might actually work in our favor. There'll be fewer people around to notice our arrival." As they mounted their horses and prepared to leave the canyon, Jake felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness that always came before a dangerous undertaking. But this time was different. Usually he was looking out only for himself, but now he had Martha and her family depending on him. The ride to Copper Creek took them across increasingly familiar terrain as they approached the main road. Jake used the time to go over the plan once more and to prepare for the various ways things might go wrong. "What if Sheriff Barnes suspects something immediately?" Martha asked as they crested a hill that gave them their first view of the town's lights in the distance. "Then we improvise," Jake replied. "But I'm counting on his greed to make him careless. When criminals think they're about to get a big payoff, they often make mistakes they wouldn't normally make." Mr. Clayton pointed toward the town. "There's Henderson's store, and I can see our wagon still sitting behind it. Looks like everything is just as we left it." As they rode into the outskirts of Copper Creek, Jake felt the weight of his revolver against his hip and hoped the plan would work without requiring any more violence. But experience had taught him that when dealing with corrupt lawmen and organized criminals, it was always best to be prepared for the worst possible outcome. The main street of Copper Creek was quiet, except for the sounds coming from the Silver Dollar Saloon. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Jake could hear the tinkling of a piano and the murmur of conversation. Somewhere in that building, he knew, was at least one person who was part of the conspiracy against Martha's family. "Remember," Jake said quietly as they approached Henderson's store, "we're tired travelers who are grateful to be back in civilization. Nothing more, nothing less." As they dismounted in front of the store, Jake noticed a figure watching them from the shadows across the street. Their arrival had definitely been noticed, which meant word would soon reach Sheriff Barnes that the Clayton family had returned to town. The trap was about to be set, and Jake could only hope that when it snapped shut, it would catch the right people.